All
Let me know
right,
when you.
we're live.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gents. My name is Oscar. We're here with Josh, Jaden, Nick, and Jared. How y'all doing tonight?
Good, I'm good, I'm good.
Good. I'm
All
good. I'm
right,
good.
that's good. So this is our podcast, Breaking Boundaries, your woman empowerment podcast, streaming weekly on Tuesdays at 9 a.m. So today we're going to be discussing the topic of inequality in women's sport. We're going to dive into and debrief some of the things about like what is inequality. And so firstly, inequality by definition is the quality of being unequal or uneven. And this can be in the form of social disparities, disparity of distribution or opportunity, or the lack of evenness. So now that you guys have a rough idea of what inequality is, you may be thinking, how does this possibly relate to women's sports? So this is what we're here to talk about today. We're going to be covering several points in which inequality happens within women's sports, starting from a historical perspective, and we'll transition more into between points. We're going to be looking at the social cultural side of things, the spiritual side of things, the psychological and emotional side of things, and the physiology and anatomy as well. And so, as always, if you enjoy our podcast, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification button as we upload daily and stream every week.
Thanks for the introduction, Oscar. As we previously mentioned, we're going to be covering many points. I'm going to be specifically diving into the history behind women's sports and ask these guys some questions and hopefully share some opinions. The first topic I'm going to discuss is women's sports in the 1900s. So just to give some brief context, back then, women's sports were extremely limited in both funding and attendance. An example of this is promoters of women's sports often highlighted novelty and sex appeal rather than their performance skills. An individual by the name of Colonel McCombs, who was head of the women's sports program of the Causality in, Insurance Program of Dallas, claimed that shorts worn by the company's AAU, also known as the Amateur Athletic Union, women's basketball team in 1926 raised attendance from 150 to 5,000 people. Motley published an article in 2001 that found that it was a common practice for females to fundraise their own money as a source of funding through bake sales, car washes, and other kinds of fundraisers. They also carpooled to sports events using their parents' cars and used uniforms that were hand-me-downs from their boys' junior varsity teams. This leads to the question of, do you think of how the rise of women's sports came to be was appropriate or necessary to develop into what it is today?
Okay, I have a few thoughts about that. Um, just to ask a question back, just to clarify. So it was like the shorts, like you're talking about the shorts that the girls wore on the
Yeah.
basketball team.
Yeah, they were like just hand me down. Like they were used by the boys' junior varsity teams before, and then they were just handed down to the girls' team.
W- So wait, like I'm just kind of confused on what about them made the attendance raise from 150 to 5,000 people.
It was more of like the because back then they looked for more sex appeal in sports rather than actual performance.
Okay.
So when they wore shorts, it was like there was less like back then there's obviously less skin involved in sport for men, but for women it was seen as kind of like a good thing as for like
Oh,
men. So
okay.
that's why there's more attendance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Anybody else want to answer that question?
Well, after you explaining that, like clarifying the question, yeah, I definitely like the way it has developed into what it is today. Obviously, from back then, it wasn't appropriate. You know, they're doing it for
Mhm.
the wrong intentions. And like the attendance increasing, it's not like for their skills or to see their success, but rather that just for the fans' entertainment. You know, and they
not for
just
the
want.
right reasons. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, definitely not appropriate. Yeah.
Mhm. Um, Yeah, so basically, yeah, it was pretty much, you guys pretty much summed up all the points. So for my next topic, I'm going to be talking about just racism in tennis in general. Uh, so tennis has normally little to no physical contact between players, so it's considered like a beautiful sport. As like you can see that there's this common topic of beauty within the sports context and in the presence of women's sports specifically. Uh, an article by Fernandez et al. In 2023 states that tennis back then was represented in magazines through white cisgender heterosexual women from ruling classes. This is because they had normal access to sports clubs, whereas those of African American descent didn't. An example of a problem that arose in tennis was because of the player by the name of Althea Gibson. She was actually the first black woman to win the Roland Garros tournament in 1956, which broke racism barriers. Despite this, she was given little publicity, and she was actually given like a small note in the corner of a magazine. And because of this, it challenged black patriarchy as well as white supremacy because she dressed and expressed herself in ways society considered like masculine in the sport of tennis. These magazines actually had no images of her or her social cultural challenges. No other images of black women were found in any sections of the magazine. So this leads up to the question in the 1900s of women's sports, which slowly grew to the sport of tennis. However, there was little publicity for female tennis players and even more for African Americans. Why do you think that is?
Um, I think, well, I don't know, just around those times, like not even like even outside the context of sport, um, just like white supremacy was very prominent in general. So that definitely just transcended into sport. Um, in terms of publicity, I don't know, like I said, I think it's just like it was very easy to transcend because
Mm,
around like the 1900s, that's definitely when white supremacy was being expressed in society very heavily. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts, but
Um, like you, like you said, the 1900s. That was definitely, I believe, that like in like late 1800s, 1900s. That was the century where, only women began to form like athletic clubs. So
mm,
really, they were just starting to gain like more women athletes. So get like that's a main contributing factor. And also I know not recently, but like the whole situation with Serena Williams as well. Do you guys recall like how like she was always like criticized for what she was wearing or anything like that?
mm. Yeah,
yeah, a
Yeah.
little
I
bit.
remember I remember there's like a huge story on that. So like how like them sort of masking like the African Americans from the sport. Like it's sort of like the same thing what they tried to do with Serena. Like they try to place barriers on her and then limit what she could wear because what she was wearing, I believe it was like showing too much masculine
Mm,
um like figure, I guess. So yeah, they placed so many barriers on her just to like um I guess what you say, like trace it back to what they um believe the sport of tennis should be, you know?
Yeah,
yeah, no, I totally agree. Like when someone's considered like too dominant in a sport, it's seen as like kind of like masculine kind of thing.
yeah, for sure, sure.
That moves on to the third topic, which is like women's sports like in the present time or like somewhat closer to the present time. Um, as time progressed, the first international conference in women and sports took place in Brighton, UK in May 1994, as described in the article by Dr. Namarta Vadhera in 2018. The purpose of this conference was to empower women and improve their roles in sport because during the first Olympic Games in the 1896, women weren't allowed to actually participate in any of the games. But however, in the 1992 Winter Olympics, both genders were allowed to participate in the sport of figure skating. But despite this, programs often required men to perform 3 triple jumps and for women only 1. With women's sports becoming increasingly popular, there's still a low ratio of female coaches and executives in sports organization. Uh, this is a good example of actually the low ratio and of female coaches. Uh, within the last 4 years, or within the last like however many years, women's sports program has been. There's actually only been one NBA female coach, and her name is Becky Hammon. And the only reason why she was appointed coach was because the main coach, who is Greg Popovich, was ejected, and he gave Becky Hammon the role basically because she was the assistant coach at the time. And this was all the way in 2020s, and there still hasn't been another female coach since then. Over the past few years, there's been a dramatic increase in the amount of participation and popularity in female sports within the 20th century, and especially in the last quarter century. The next question I'm going to be asking is related to the Brighton Declaration, which aims, but first I'm going to list what the main aims are. The main aims of the Brighton Declaration is to ensure that all women and girls have the opportunity to participate in sport in a safe and supportive environment that preserves the right, dignity, and respect of the individual, increases the involvement of women in sport at all levels and in all functions and roles, ensure that the knowledge, experiences, and values of women contribute to the development of sport, promote the recognition of women's involvement in sport as a contribution to public life, community development, and in building a healthy nation. And lastly, promote the recognition by women of the intrinsic value of sport and its contribution to personal development and healthy lifestyle. The question I'm going to be asking is, after hearing about the main points of the Brighton Declaration, do you think that these points were effective and are still being used in women's sports to this day?
It's a good question.
Mm.
There's a lot to consider there for sure.
So were you saying that until like this present time there's only been one female coach?
Like in NBA history, but like obviously in like WNBA and other like college sports that there has been like female coaches.
So I think based on the first 2 points, it increasing the involvement of women in sport, that's not something that can be done easily, but by considering the first main point, like encouraging and like ensuring that there is a safe and supporting environment that can preserve the rights and dignity of women is important to just allow for that space to grow before you can even consider like increasing involvement, whether that be maybe increasing participation in youth or encouraging it later down the line. I think that is the main basis, and that is a good rule that they enforced from the beginning.
Mhm.
100%, 100%.
Yeah, basically you pretty much got it. So for my last topic, it's just like physical educational history. I'm just gonna be talking about the question first to hopefully create some like general ideas, and I'll be disclosing the information that I found through my research. So the question is, why do you think that women were prohibited from participating in sports? It's a pretty general topic, so like there's no right or wrong answers.
You know, I think the media actually had like a big role to play in terms of like limiting like women participation in sports because I think you guys all heard like when it comes to the WNBA, like a lot of people would be like, oh, it's not entertaining because they can't dunk, they can't do this. I think because of like of that media attention,
Hmm.
like it kind of like restricted their participation in sports.
For sure. And to
Yeah.
build on top of that, we're gonna get into this later. But
Yeah.
like I like how you said oh like it's less people say it's less entertaining and stuff. I feel like there's definitely that belief that just because they can't do or they are not believed to be able to do the same stuff that males can do, there's just automatically that belief that oh it's like less entertaining. But in truth, it can be just as entertaining in different ways for sure, right? But in
Hmm.
terms of them being prohibited from sports, it just all comes back to that notion that they can't do this, they can't do that,
Yeah.
right?
It's
Mhm.
just
So
like a mindset thing, right?
yeah,
Like
that's
you'll
definitely what I
see college, like male college sports be glorified, or even like male high school sports being glorified and really popularized as of late. But honestly, like the highest level professional female athletes could definitely compete with lower level male athletes, right?
Mhm.
for
So it's
sure.
just like, it's a mindset thing. It's that outlook that women can't do the same thing.
It's
It
that
automatically just
stereotype. Yeah,
suggests, yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like back to what Oscar was saying, how like pro like female players can compete with like male players as well. Like if you guys saw like the All-Star weekend, the NBA All-Star weekend the
Mm.
past week, like Sabrina Ionescu, I think was her name.
Yeah,
She
yeah,
actually uh tied with Damian Lillard and like top NBA players like at the three-point contest, which is kind of crazy if you think about it.
yeah. And I
Um
swear Damian Lillard won the 3-point contest, and she had the same
yeah.
score as him. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
there you go. There's a point right there.
If she
Yeah,
was in the competition, she could have won it. Like,
Yeah.
it's the
basically.
same
Literally.
thing.
Yeah.
Just like another like quick question. Do you guys think that it was uh like fair despite her using a smaller ball? Or do you think she should have used a bigger ball? They still shot from the same like 3-point line though.
No, I think that's fair.
Yeah, because I think if she was to use like an NBA size ball, now
Hmm.
in a way she's kind of at a disadvantage because her whole life she was trained to use
Exactly.
Hmm.
that version of it.
Exactly.
So yeah,
Nice.
I
Okay.
I don't think it's the same thing if you were to say if Steph Curry used a smaller ball, but
Yeah.
in the same way, it would also put him at a disadvantage, right?
Hmm.
So I definitely think that it was fair and it was justified.
And I
Yeah.
don't know if this is like a right or wrong answer, but I feel like it's pretty common knowledge that females are smaller or like just in a lower stature. So naturally her hand would be smaller. So I feel like ratio wise, a smaller ball,
Yeah.
a
On a
male
relative
athlete and
scale,
an NBA ball, like relatively,
yeah,
it's equal playing field. So I think that it was right for her to use a
for sure.
WNBA ball.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually leads into the last question, which is going to revolve around sexuality. To give some context, the author Rita Liberty in 2017 actually published an article discussing how the president of the California Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance in 1994, by the name of Gail Evans, who was a lesbian, who asked her partner to open up about her story. Um, in her remarks, her partner opened up about how their faiths, sexual orientation, and former role as an athlete, physical education major joined to create her identity and helped her assist others that may be going through the same spiritual journey. As a result, this actually left her some of her colleagues like extremely mad, and like just from that, like it's kind of like a good example of how homophobia still is deeply embedded within women's physical education history. Um, we can still somewhat see that it's prevalent in today's society. For these past few years, pros have been slowly opening up about their sexuality. Some being Sue Bird, who's a famous WNBA player, who came out as gay in 2017. Her interview said that she was actually afraid of opening up. Another famous basketball player by the name of Jason Collins, who is an NBA player who played for 13 seasons with numerous teams, said that we should always authentically live our lives, and that we shouldn't have to hide or feel afraid. Despite these words of encouragement, he actually quotes that, but there is that fear stepping forward. So for the last question from me is, do you think there are effects to speaking out on one's sexuality within today's sports culture?
I think when it comes to sexuality, especially in today's day, right? I think it's really important to for one to express their social identity so that they could feel like that sense of like belonging wherever they're at. So like later on in this podcast, we're gonna talk about like different like aspects of one's social identity. like religion and like just like one's sexual orientation, like it's a way of just of them just expressing themselves of who they are and then like how in a way they fit in that area, which is like the sporting culture. So yes, there may be like negative effects in the sense where there may be like negative responses, but for the self, it's important because in a way, when you're expressing your social identity, you're feeling like you belong in that culture, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's more of like speaking your mind rather than like kind of following what social media like holds against you kind of thing.
Yeah, and
And just like
keeping
the
it in. And
backlash that you could face.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Like like have you guys seen Kyrie Irving where like he's talking like he speaks out on religion and stuff and
Yeah,
then
it
people were
talks
like giving him
about
backlash?
talks a lot about controversial stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for
But
sure.
that's him expressing himself,
Yeah, yeah.
like, in this social environment too. So
Yeah, I feel like the people that do, they've kind of developed that mindset of like not caring.
Hmm.
But since there is, like Josh was saying, since there is such like a culture of like judgment and like fear of backlash and stuff, that not everybody can obviously do that, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, and I guess not speaking out about your sexuality could lead to more effects like depression or whatever, more negative effects, like Josh was
Hmm.
also saying. Um, but I think that it definitely is just important for there to be in the future, for there to be a development of being able to just speak out and be able to express yourself while being comfortable.
It's like creating like a safe platform, safe environment for
Yeah.
Yeah,
yourself and
yeah,
for others
for
who come
sure.
in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's
Um
like a freedom of expression, you know,
basically, yeah.
environments.
literally.
Yeah.
So back to what we talked about, like, I believe a few points ago where we talked about like just like revenue in general between the NBA and WNBA. Um, Actually, in the NBA, the average salary in 2021 was 7.7 million, whereas for the WNBA, the average salary was 130,000. So you can kind of see that big disparity between the two,
That's insane.
which leads to uh the next topic which is sociocultural. So Nick, after hearing about the pay gap between the NBA and WNBA players being so big,
Mm.
what's your opinion? Do you think that it's because that there's a skill gap between these professional sports leagues, or is it possibly because the lack of coverage and uh, sponsorships and opportunities?
All right. Yeah, honestly, there are a lot of intersecting barriers causing this huge pay gap. But I know there are many like athletes, female athletes, even today. I know recently, like the U.S. soccer team, the women's U.S. soccer team, they actually made a comment on this. They were saying like, um, their like desire for equality, like equal pay, it was actually misguided. They focused more on the issue of marketing and promotion, which I will be talking about within the sociocultural aspects of the inequality in women's sports. So, where I think they're getting at is that within the media representation in women's sports, there is less media coverage compared to men's sports. And obviously you could tell that like just by turning on your TV, majority of what you watched right now is all men's sports. It's and if you want to find women's sports, it's you have to flip through a couple of channels and then occasionally you'll find them. So like with this lower media coverage, the lower revenue generated for females compared to men's sports, this is the main contributing factor to why their pay is different. So this leads to fewer financial resources available for investments in women's sports. So, a main example of this, you could see it back in the pandemic when the March Madness was going on, the NCAA March Madness. There was actually a time where the women's team they received like less media coverage, less investment for their tournament in whole and as a whole. So the less investment and resources it transferred to their availability and also equipments. So I'll also talk about that in the later topic. But also additionally, with the less media coverage, it can perpetuate the belief that women's sports are less important or entertaining, leading to fewer opportunities for female athletes to showcase their talents and attract sponsorships. So sponsorships is a big part of why their pay is different. And there's also a comment. I forgot who made this comment, but I've heard it on while I was just scrolling through the media. She was saying like male, like for example, NBA players, the male athletes, they receive a lot of revenue from their jersey sales. And then she exposed that for female basketball players, they actually receive no revenue at all for their jersey sales. So these sponsorships could help a lot within their pay if they receive more exposure and media representation. So I wanted to just connect this to an article by Kuki. Um, they did a longitudinal data that indicates a decline in media coverage of women's sports over the past 20 years. And they noted that the TV sports news announcers were all men, while channels such as SportsCenter included a few women announcers. So with this discrepancy, 100% of the SportsCenter programs and 100% of the local affiliates sports programs had men's sports as the lead story. And there were a number of significant stories in women's sports that were ignored by the local affiliates and ESPN, another news channel, sports channel. And while one could argue that women's sports receive less attention given that there were few major women's events or professional leagues competing during our sample time frame, reporters continually delivered stories on men's sports that were out of season. So including stories on professional football in March and July, or pro baseball in November and pro basketball in July. And we could actually see this like there's like top 30 or top 50, top 100 plays. You can mainly just see all like replayed videos of men's sports, whereas at the same time, like that current time, there could be women's sports being um, displayed in the media. So that's one example. So all this information given to you guys, I just wanted to ask you guys um, about media representation. How do you think we can increase the media coverage for women in sports?
Um, would would you consider like video games a type of media? Is that I'm not sure. Is that considered?
Honestly, yeah, that helps a lot actually, because like I know my little cousins when they play video games, that actually teaches them a lot of the players' names, and then
Yeah.
even when I play video games, like actually how I learned some of the players' names as well. Um, and I know lately, I know like 2K, NBA 2K, they added women's the WNBA in the
Yeah, that's what I was
yeah.
about to say. Just this year in the newest FIFA, they
Mhm.
let you play with both women and men on your like when you create a team, you can
Mm.
play with both women and men. So I think like even for me, that's like increased my both interest and like just the attention that I pay towards women's sports. Like now I know a bunch of the players, like the women's soccer players in like all the different leagues and stuff like that. So something even as simple as that, like FIFA is a huge game. There's like millions of players all around the world who I guess probably before may have just paid attention to just strictly like men's soccer. Um, but now there's that aspect of, oh, there's these women who are actually like who can actually play at a professional level. And I guess that's why I asked, like, would you consider video games like media? Because that kind of covers their side of things, right?
Mhm.
So I guess that's one way that um, coverage could be increased just through integrating both genders in something that a lot of people engage in, right?
That's
Yeah,
valid. Yeah.
yeah,
I didn't even think of that. Yeah.
yeah.
All right. All right. And also, I'll also touch on the topic of stereotyping. So with the media coverage, honestly, when they are displayed on TV or any type of media, women athletes are portrayed or sometimes subjected to stereotypes such as being portrayed as less skilled, less competitive, or more focused on their appearance than their male counterparts. So these stereotypes can undermine the achievement and abilities of female athletes and reinforce gender biases. So we talked about this earlier with Jared, but I wanted to bring this back up again. So the recently in the Steph Curry and Sabrina shootout 3-point contest. This was on February 17th, so this past weekend. They matched up and they shot from the 3-point line, from the same 3-point line. But then the TNT and analyst Kenny Smith, instead of promoting or uplifting the event as to like promote women in sports, he made an odd comment, which a lot of fans and other analysts caught on. He was mainly commenting on how Sabrina should have shot from the WNBA's 3-point line instead of shooting at the regulated NBA 3-point line with Steph. So this is an example of how his comments unintentionally placed boundaries onto an event that should have focused more on promoting and uplifting women's sports. So that's one stereotype example, which was done unintentionally, but still common to this day of how it could be portrayed in the media. Awesome. So that leads to my next question. Have you guys heard of any recent stories or events of how women athletes are portrayed in the media?
Um,
Um, oh, sorry,
oh,
you go.
yeah. I was gonna say like I mentioned this when Jared was I think we covered a topic similar to this, but just the whole idea of how like women's sports is not entertaining.
Hmm.
Like the media kind of portray that like, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that, therefore we're not gonna watch. So like I think like yeah, in the sense of recent stories, it's just like just the false perceptions on just like how like women engaging in sports is just not entertaining.
Yeah.
Just yeah.
Um, this is a while back actually. I don't know if you guys remember this. I don't know if it's specifically related to like how they're portrayed to like male counterparts, but like if you guys remember Brittany Griner, I think she was
The
a WNBA
WNBA
player who
player.
was
Yeah.
held in jail in I think Russia,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and she actually like I'm not gonna say nobody knew her. I'm sure there's people that did know her, but like she didn't really have that much popularity until then.
Hmm.
And even then people were like giving her backlash because she was actually traded for I think like one of Russia's like gun sellers or something. And that like people were saying how like uh that giving her backlash saying like, oh, she's not even good at the game, blah blah blah. And like giving like uh discriminating her and like saying how uh like commenting on her appearance and stuff and just like yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point that's a valid that's a good point you brought up because yeah, oftentimes when media like women are portrayed in the media, like women athlete, female athletes, we mainly hear the big stories or like the crimes they commit or like
Yeah, like the
the
bad
negative,
stuff.
yeah, the negative stuff more
Yeah.
so like their actual performance or like
Yeah.
even their more personal stories over their athletic careers. Like you hear more about like them becoming a mother or like taking a break or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
awesome. All right, so I'm going to talk about the access to resources now. So first talking about the financial resources. Access to financial resources such as funding for training facilities, equipments, coaching, and travel expenses. They can all be limited for female athletes compared to their male counterparts. This lack of financial support can hinder women's ability to pursue sports at a competitive level and can create disparities in training opportunities and athletic development. So in some communities, cultural norms or stereotypes may discourage girls from participating in sports and leading to lower participation rates and fewer opportunities for skill development and advancements in athletics. And I brought this up earlier in March 2021 when players, coaches, and fans raised concerns about the differences in facilities, and amenities and overall treatment between the men's and women's basketball tournaments. So the NCAA, the March Madness, this elephant in the room was how shown how the men's tournament featured a fully equipped weight room, while the women's tournament initially only had a small set of dumbbells and a yoga mat. So this huge discrepancy is an example of how the access to resources could be very unequal from the woman to men perspective. So, what do you guys think about that event happening back in March 2021?
Like the discrepancy thing.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously that is pretty insane. Like you can't just not give them something because you think they're less capable
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that. Um, like at the end of the day, it's a sport and the the requirements to play the sport and the requirements to get better are going to be the same regardless of the gender, right?
Hmm.
So like maybe the woman might not be lifting the same amount of weight as the men, and who knows, maybe even some might, but the exercises that they're doing and the machines they require, they obviously need the same stuff to improve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just why I think that's pretty crazy. Um, and I didn't even know that happened actually. I'm I'm quite interested in the March Madness stuff, but I never saw that. So that was a very interesting point for you to bring up.
Yeah. It's quite interesting because it's the same like NCAA tournament as well. It's just
Yeah, like it's the
female.
same under the same organization and everything.
Yeah. So it's just weird how they would
Yeah,
provide way more resources for the men compared to the female.
yeah, literally.
And they were even
That is
stating that they didn't provide those resources because they didn't have enough space for the female ones, but it's just a cover up.
Yeah, I don't buy it. I don't buy
Yeah.
it. There's no way.
Yeah.
These
Um,
colleges make crazy amount of money and they
Hmm.
have state-of-the-art facilities for everyone, not even just athletes, just like students and everything. So there's no way that they weren't able to.
mm, just to add on, um, I don't know if it was the same event or the WNBA, I think it was, I don't know if they had a bubble tournament during COVID, but I think there was a few posts on the nutrition plan for WNBA players, I think, where it was like literally just fruits and like stuff that you could buy from like grocery stores. And it was like all over social media for a little bit. I don't remember if it was March Madness or if it was like during a WNBA tournament.
I see.
I just found that pretty crazy because there's like like little funding going into female stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might have to look into that like more deeper. Maybe it's just the like nutritionists not doing their part, but
Hmm.
Yeah.
yeah, because maybe the nutritionist is not funded properly. So yeah. All right. All right, so that leads to my final point. I want to touch on the structural constraints, so the societal norms, infrastructure and facilities, access to sports infrastructure and facilities such as athletic fields, gyms, and training centers can vary, uh, can vary widely because on socio-cultural factors such as geographic location, socioeconomic status, and community support. Women and girls in undeserved communities may face barriers to accessing quality facilities, which can limit their ability to participate in sports and compete at higher levels. All right. So, um, in this article, from Anaza and McDowell in 2013, an investigation of constraints restricting urban Nigerian women from participating in recreational sport activities. This article, it provided some supporting evidence in that how structural constraints could limit the um, accessibility, feasibility to women in sports. So they basically touched upon how in developing countries such as Nigeria, past research studies have focused on factors attributed to recreational sport participation um, of men and women. All right. So facilities are outdated, poorly maintained, and lack proper equipment. Governmental support for recreational infrastructure is lacking, and cost is a significant barrier to participation in recreational sports. The members' fees for clubs and facilities are often expensive for them, and they even quoted that many women cannot afford the expenses associated with recreational activities. Um, so with all these intersecting barriers, these could show how infrastructure and facilities, they all have their barriers to, and like structural constraints on women and how they participate in sports, limiting them to uh, further develop them in the future or even participate, even simple things like leisure activity. Yeah. So, Josh, we discussed many intersecting barriers upon women in sports, especially in developing countries, like this one in the article from Anaza and McDowell. Are you able to touch on any other intersecting barriers?
Yeah, in terms of intersecting barriers, so first we talked about historical barriers, and we also talked about social cultural aspects. So for this, I want to shed light onto spiritual aspects. So before I even dive into that, I was going to ask you guys a question. So within the spiritual aspect, we could talk about religion too, of women's sport. Talk to me about some of the negative or positive experiences some female athletes may experience due to the religion. If you guys know any like just recent events.
Um, Actually, when I was looking through few articles about the historical like inequality in women's sports or whatever,
Yeah.
I actually saw an article that Muslim women are less likely to take part in women's sports than Western non-Muslims, and that some of the barriers were because of bans on Islamic headscarves,
Yeah.
which were also known as hijabs.
Yeah, that I was gonna say something around that, like that context. I've never specifically heard of an instance where it's happened, but I can definitely see how the women who do wear the hijabs could experience some type of barrier in their sport because obviously that's something they have to wear. But I could see it definitely see a sporting organization saying, "Oh, you're not allowed to wear that and participate." And then that just I feel like that if there's one instance, it just like it's gonna create more because if another girl hears that, oh, she wasn't allowed to wear it, so I'm not gonna be allowed to wear it, so why should I participate, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. That's just some thought.
Yeah, that's actually one of the aspects I want to talk about. So, family members or societal members who hold traditional views about religious women roles, right? So, an article that assesses the association between Pakistani women religious beliefs and sports participation. Some religions hold cultural values and place emphasis on the feminist roles women should acquire, which may sometimes interfere with sports participation. So, for instance, there was an article written by Chang in 2019, and he states that when it comes to Muslim minorities in the West, gender is often configured as a primary site of cultural incompatibility. So what that means is this lies in the perception that the hijab on Muslim women represents weakness, oppression, and vulnerability. Or from this perspective, it may create discriminatory behaviors within athletic environments that goes against such beliefs. So therefore minimizing sport and social participation. So just from that point, the idea that they'll view women as weak, oppressed, and vulnerable, in a sense, could like affect people from those populations, those women in that have like a religious background, thinking, okay, they're gonna view me as weak, vulnerable, so now I cannot participate in the sport that is deemed as masculinized, right? So also values and ethical religious beliefs within the role of women encompasses principles of integrity and respect, which can foster a culture of diverse cooperation within women's sports. So there's some religious backgrounds, such as the Islamic religion. They would have, like I said, they have values and ethical beliefs that kind of just demonstrates like what it means to be a woman. So just incorporating those values within athletic environments will allow not just inclusion but just cooperation within athletic environments. So the second point I want to talk about was modesty and dress code. So yes, we talked about the hijab, right? Certain religions may have modesty requirements that dictate how women should dress, which can impact their ability to participate in certain sports. So, for instance, some Muslim women may choose to wear modest attire, such as the hijab, while participating in sports, even physical activity, which may present challenges or limitations in the sports in certain sports contexts. So, discrimination against religious modesty, such as hijab wears in the Islamic religion, and the enforcement of modest clothing within strict religions like Buddhism, may arise in the arrangement of dressing rooms, privacy, and showers, as displaying nudity in front of other women may be deemed as inappropriate. So there would be times, because in the Islamic religion or even other religions, maybe the removal of certain type of clothing like the hijab could be seen as disrespectful, like they're not allowed to see like their hair. But then other populations within that sport environment was kind of see that as like a limitation, or them kind of holding back from just, how would I say this? Just enjoying just the sport atmosphere, because they always have to adapt to religious adaptations, if that makes sense. So in an article written by Elmila 2020, so in 2007, FIFA, which is the governing body of world football, banned the hijab in competition. And in 2011, the Iran's female football team was banned from playing unless they removed their scarves, so like their hijabs, their religious attire. So although the ban was lifted in 2012, banning a religious custom, which is part of the identity, which is also something we're going to talk about later in terms of religion and sports, which is part of the identity of a person, was justified on health and safety grounds, as well as the grounds of religious neutrality. So my question is for you guys, although the banning of religious items was justified on health and safety grounds, do you guys think that the social identic aspect should be regarded in this situation?
Well, I don't think it has to be regarded. I think it has to be respected.
Yeah.
And the fact that, like, these things have to be taken seriously, and they are not like, there's like no room for, oh, you can do this or you can't do that. It's what the religion says. There's no going against it, or else you're going against your religion in itself. And that has to be accommodated in some way. And to not be able to do that restricts or prevents opportunities for these athletes in a way. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like I think in terms of that question, there's like a conflicting like role where it's like, okay, it's justified by the health and safety grounds, but at the same time it goes against one's social identity, which is important in terms of expression in the natural social environment, right? So just to go off of social identity in women's sports, so religion as one's identity and motivation for participation in sports is usually most of these female athletes reason why they play. So identity and belonging. For some female athletes, their religious or spiritual identity forms a significant part of who they are. It can shape their sense of belonging within their team, community, or sport, providing a support system and a sense of shared values. So aligning spiritual or religious beliefs with sport allows women athletes to discover their purpose in life, increasing in discipline and find fulfillment through their athletic pursuits through connecting with deeper spiritual dimensions of their lives. So an example could be incorporating religious practices like prayer. It could be like before a game or even during the game if they feel anxious, they could resort back to that religious practice, which is part of their identity. They could say a prayer, right, during a sport activity. So in an article written by Navhan in 2016 called Playing for God, so in a sense that kind of relates to the whole idea of like one's social identity from a religious perspective. The article highlights how Christian women athletes experience religion when engaging in sports when they're able to maintain their beliefs, as well as a sense of individual conscience and choice. So oftentimes, it may seem difficult to maintain religious values in non-religious settings, conflicted with their identity as one's religion is part of an individual's identity. So, for instance, let's say there was a person named Sarah, right? And she was practicing her religion as a Christian. And oftentimes she would feel that sense of unbelonging in an environment that's non-religious, that doesn't practice the same Christian beliefs, because oftentimes it would be unaccepting in that way. And I feel like we talked about this earlier when we talked about the sexual orientation aspect of social identity, how it's important to just create that atmosphere of belongingness, right? So in the same way, when we relate it back to religion and women's sports, it's important to just create that environment of belonging so one could express their freedom of who they are, their social identity, their religion, in places that may be non-religious, if that makes sense. So societal stereotypes towards religious identity beliefs are social and psychological factors that influence female sport participation. So going to Oscar, if you want to touch upon that area of psychological and emotional aspects of women's sports.
Yeah, so looking into what impacts female athlete, we have to like consider the topic of social identity, which you touched on. And like some of the topics that pressure female athletes in ways that we already touched on, like gender norms, body image, and social or sport inequity. Based on evidence in a review study done by Jurkic and Pedicic in 2012, it notes how participation in physical activity in females brings many benefits for both physical and mental well-being. Yet, despite these known advantages, we continue to see a disparity in sport participation. So I just want to pose to you guys, like, how do these gender stereotypes or norms influence what goes through the mind of an actively participating female athlete in these traditionally dominated male sports in what they're viewed by?
I mean, there's definitely a detrimental effect, um, just because like we've all been saying this whole podcast, like there's definitely that thought of like, oh, I can't do this, or because I'm a girl, I can't do this as well as let's say like a male counterpart would be able to do. Um, but in terms of gender stereotypes and norms, I think, like I said, it just kind of goes back to that regular point of there's just that general notion that like uh that females will never be at the same level as males, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just what I think. I don't know.
Yeah, and those like general thoughts and ideas, they pose like sort of as a barrier to young athletes and girls who try to participate or get active in sport and
Yeah,
activity.
for sure.
But I want to ask you guys, like, how do you think it affects either like competitive level or like professional level um, athletes? Like, how do you think there are different stereotypes or norms, like gender wise, that apply to those who have already made it or at a already high level?
Um, I think at a high level, there's a constant like measure of like their appearance and then their body weight or like just depending on their sports, like especially like gymnastics or like figure skating, they always have to have a constant like watch on their weight and then their appearance as well. So these like this could have a huge effect on their like emotions and psychological like on their mind because like such as body image like it'll affect their like eating habits, like have bulimia or like eating disorders, and then they'll like even fast or something just to like achieve the goals, like achieve a certain weight they need to maintain, or even like the appearance, like restrict their uh food intake just to appear slim. So like in that way, like that affects them psychologically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like regardless of what age or what level, like female athletes tend to experience way more challenges and like they face more stereotypes to uh, compared to male athletes. And one big thing that you guys already touched on is like the opportunity, the pay, the wage. Like
Mm-hmm.
even at
Sure.
even if female athletes are at the highest level, they've made it to the highest level that they can make it. They still face pay disparities compared to male sports. So yeah. So that leads into like my next topic of equal opportunity. So looking longitudinally at like female sport participation, according to a study by Olmsted in 2022, as time has gone on, women's sport from 1972 has increased with college participation up 545%, high school involvement 990%, and media coverage and equal opportunity demonstrated a parallel level of growth, or has this opportunity remained like stagnant compared to like participation increasing? So like
Mm,
a way I could reword it is like relatively, like participation has increased, has opportunity and pay increased, or despite there being more involvement, has pay like remained the same?
Mhm. Um, I would say personally, like with like WNBA social media like slowly growing, there's like more popularity in certain players. Like for example, like Sabrina, like I'm just gonna keep using the example, but like at the All-Star weekend she like broke uh during the WNBA All-Star weekend, she actually I think hit 39 points, which is almost the maximum for the three-point competition. And just being able to perform at the same level as these NBA players, like it shows that she's able to compete with the same like level of people despite her gender. And I feel like that definitely kind of increases that popularity for her and like hopefully it have an increase in sales. Like as I think it was Nick who mentioned the jersey sales earlier. I feel like um by gaining that kind of popularity for her skill for shooting and just being like popular within the WNBA community will increase her kind of sales for jerseys.
and yeah, to just to build off of that in terms of like popularity and stuff, um, I think just recently the popularity of like certain WNBA, like we're gonna keep using WNBA as an example, but just women's sport like in general, like I was talking about the FIFA game and stuff. I think recently it's been on a rise. Um, but until recently I think there's always been that great disparity between um I guess male and female. But we're definitely seeing more opportunity now for women to even transcend into male sport like Sabrina. Um Again, gonna keep using her as an example, but I know she just got her first signature shoe with Nike,
Mhm.
and I see like a lot of like male basketball players wearing her shoes, supporting her, like wearing her shoes on the court, like professional NBA players and even like players that I know like want her shoes. So there's definitely an increasing level of popularity, and that is definitely going to contribute to media coverage and pay because she's definitely getting money off of those shoes and everything like that. So I think, yeah, like I just think it's on the rise for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's important to consider for these female elite athletes because we have to consider that this is their lifestyle, like this is their career, which is going to support them in their future.
Yeah,
And so,
literally.
like, I want to ask you guys, like, how does that impact, like, girls' confidence and, like, considerations in pursuing sport at a young age or even later in their career? Like, it's something that they have to consider. So I just want to ask, like, is it improving in a sense that, like, women or girls can feel comfortable, like, knowing that they are secure and that they will be able to pursue such athletic endeavors in the future for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think so for sure. Like I don't know, I like again going back to the example of getting signature shoes like Sabrina. I think that's like if young female basketball players were to see that, that's definitely a source of motivation. Like, I think if I'm not mistaken, she was the first WNBA player to receive a signature shoe. So that's only the start of it, right? There's definitely a lot more young female prospects coming up as we speak who are definitely seeing that as a way, as a source of motivation to be like, oh, if she can do it, if she can get signed by Nike and get her own shoe, I can definitely do it too, right? So I think there's definitely that, which is working to increase confidence, motivation, and everything. And I know female basketball is just in general is on the rise. See a lot of college teams and stuff like that. But yeah,
There's a is there a professional women's hockey league now?
yeah. There, I literally just heard about that. There's,
Yeah.
it's called, it might be PWHL. I think
That's
that's what it's called.
It's really good because like I could imagine like as a young female athlete, let's say like they had just goals to play hockey at the professional level, but then they realize there's not even a league,
Yeah, like there's nowhere to go, right?
so like
Mm.
Yeah.
I think in terms of just like progression, like there's a woman hockey league, so
Yeah, we're
that's
we're seeing we're seeing it happen, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like it's literally just the start. Um,
Yeah,
I
it's
think there's
funny.
only you can.
But yeah, I was gonna say it's neat how you brought up the PWHL because my I have like a few friends, they're from U of T as well. They're doing sports journalism. So they actually like they're covering all the media stuff and they've been promoting it as well. So through them I was actually educated and I learned that like it was a full attendance, like the whole Scotiabank Arena was like it was all packed, no seats
Mhm.
were
I
empty.
think I heard that too.
Yeah, so just watching the Toronto professional ice hockey team, the women's hockey team, and then also it was mainly filled with young kids as well. So then them having that role model it just shows them that like it's not impossible anymore, you know?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and so just to build on what we already know and discussed, in an article done by Alyssa Burt in 2021, it states that in spite of the increase in women's sport participation, it understands that women athletes often receive less pay due to the limited media representation. And it mentions that despite the strides in women's sport, the spotlight on male sports by the media overlooks the success of women in sport. And due to this, the lack of visibility affects public attention and thus their incomes. And so that leads into the point of like, is there like a make it or break it mindset for like these young and up and coming athletes? Like we know with men's sports that if you don't make it to the NBA, for example, there are options to go overseas or there are lower level leagues that you can go to or fall back on. And so I just want to know, like, are there any middle ground or fallback options for these female athletes? And if not, like, if consider yourself as like one of those top female athletes who can't find or can't get that spot, like, what does that do to a person, like, in terms of their life and future outcomes?
Um, I actually saw a Twitter post where LeBron James was saying how uh college female basketball players have to do 4 years before they can actually be drafted to the WNBA. So I feel like it can go both ways, where those who are already playing at that high enough level have to go through that education to be able to be drafted. But I feel like it's also like kind of like a fallback net for those who can kind of maintain it, but like if they were to be injured and like fall off uh like that kind of high level of basketball, that they still have that degree in order to like get a job or whatever.
Exactly.
It's kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go.
Yeah. So overall, like, according to an article done by O'Brien and colleagues in 2021, as a result, like, regardless of whatever level of women's sport that they're in, like, developing a psychological resilience is crucial for these female athletes facing challenges like sport inequity, body image, and like eating disorders or mental distress, those sort of things. But yeah, that concludes the emotional side of women's sports. So now we'll dive into the physiological aspects.
Okay, for sure. So just to start you guys off, I just want to ask you guys what your guys' knowledge is, basically on the differences between male and female physiologies, in the context of sport and like advantage and disadvantage. Um, Basically, can you think of all of the structures which contribute to like the differences that exist, like all of the structures within the body?
Yeah,
Um,
so I mean,
oh, sorry.
like just being blunt. Oh no, go ahead, go ahead.
I just know some basic ones. Like, I believe that the reason why there's a smaller ball in like WNBA is because like their hands are a lot smaller.
Hmm.
And like, I do remember seeing where their lungs are actually a little bit smaller than men's, so their capacity is a little bit smaller.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
no, that I was just gonna say the same thing. Like, it just generally understood, like, not assuming anything, but that their stature is smaller. They're
just in
physically,
general, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So just to expand on that, in an article that I read by Heather in 2022, she stated that it's more like I feel like there's definitely a general belief that it's just just muscle mass that contributes to the disadvantage that women can have. But she states that it's more than that. Um, and in fact that the male brain undergoes a masculinization during early life, which has been shown to cause an increased amount of interconnectivity between regions of the brain that are responsible for many functions that are definitely essential to sport, such as perception and action coordination, auditory and visual spatial awareness and processing, and complex reasoning and control. So you guys could definitely see where that could play a role in any sport, whether it's soccer, basketball, whatever. Also, the testosterone hormone plays a role in bone growth. So, post-pubertal males show a 10% increase in bone mass density, which contributes to a reduced chance of injury, which I guess you could say contributes to, in the long run, better longevity in sport. So I guess you could say males can essentially play sport for longer. And they also have increased bone size and length, which contributes to increased fulcrum power, which will improve the individual's many aspects in an individual, such as their jumping height and throwing length, and larger bones, like larger cross-sectional area on a bone, will allow for more placement of skeletal muscle attachment. So just more muscle in general. And the cardiorespiratory system or systems are also affected. You guys mentioned it, touched on it pretty well, that females are said to have decreased lung volume compared to men, as well as smaller hearts. So I just want to kind of expand on that. How do you guys think this could affect performance in a sporting context with regard to advantage slash disadvantage, like smaller hearts and decreased lung volume?
Um, well, not with small hearts and decreased lung volume, but I know with like testosterone, we've we've been educated a lot about how, um, like back then, the sporting events like the Olympics, the IOC, International Olympic Committee, they
Hmm.
used to do like t testosterone like testing, make sure females don't have a like exceed a certain amount of testosterone levels. I
Yeah.
forgot how much, but like that definitely like that's definitely a barrier to their like participation in their competition. Like I believe there's actually this one athlete. I have to look up her name. I believe she represents India, but she actually just naturally has a higher testosterone level, and she
Mhm.
was actually limited to compete in her events because of that. So this is a big disadvantage for her just because of that physiological aspect of testosterone levels. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it's something that she can't control, right? So it makes it even more of a disadvantage. Okay, so I have another question for you guys. I just want to know, we've touched a lot on like media coverage and opportunity and exposure. I just want to ask if you guys think is it important that these physiological differences that affect their performance be considered when it comes to the things such as media coverage um, that women receive in sport? Like, for example, um, in the context of sports highlights, like I think someone said it earlier that like they used in the example of, oh, we don't watch the NBA because women can't dunk. Women can't dunk because of for physiological reasons, right? So I just want to know your guys' thoughts on that and if it should be considered.
I think it's definitely something to be considered because at the end of the day, highlights or sport actions are what we can see with our eyes. And so like if there's something that is seen as more exciting in a sense as like a show of power or a show of speed, like
Hmm.
things that are naturally benefited or advantaged towards men will also be advantaged in a visually appealing way. So I think that it also like it affects
Like it plays a role,
like
right?
exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But you could also say that women can definitely do like phenomenal things, right?
No, yeah, they definitely can. It's just like that comparison again, and
Yeah,
it
yeah,
goes
yeah,
back to stereotyping.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so now that we kind of touched on the physiological differences between men and women, I wanted to just cover a sort of controversial topic in the sporting and gender domain. Um, do you guys think that trans women who were previously men should be able to compete in female sports or not?
That
Uh,
is a hard topic, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
yeah,
kind of putting you guys on the spot here.
I know for one, I had a recent conversation with this because it's currently happening with the Seneca volleyball team. I have a couple boys that play on the Seneca men's volleyball team.
Hmm.
Uh, and last year, their former teammates, they're transgender and they didn't get much playing time in the men's, but then this year they're playing for the women's. So, um, there's actually, I believe there's three of them, three or four playing on the lineup.
Hmm.
So there's a recent I guess a reporter, but I think he was just like not an official reporter because he was like disrespecting their choices. Like if you could watch it, you could just tell it's not a serious thing. So basically, yeah, there's this huge discussion on like the safety of the females who are playing the sports and also the participation because uh, some people who are against it, they argue that they're taking their spots, and then
Hmm.
also like due to their physiological differences, it's a hazard for them because for the other players because it could lead to concussions if
Yeah,
yeah. So honestly, I don't know. It's like
it's hard to answer, right? I feel like there's no
if they're not allowed or not allowed. So yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Well, in the same article by Heather, she mentions that hormone therapy to reduce testosterone levels to that of cisgender women has been relatively unsuccessful. So trans women that are attempting to go into female sport, they usually have to undergo hormone therapy to reduce their testosterone levels. But Heather states that it's relatively unsuccessful, and when they still do undergo it, their levels still remain higher. So there's, I guess you could say there is still an disadvantage to the cisgender woman that exists. But in contrast, a review by Harper and colleagues in 2021 showed that hormone therapy was shown to reduce hemoglobin levels to appropriate levels. Um, to the same level between cisgender women and trans women. But despite that, strength, lean body mass, and muscle area were also decreased, but they were still above levels of cisgender women. So, like I said, that advantage to the trans women still kind of exists. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the side of it's not fair, but at the same time, like from an ethical perspective, they fit into the binary sport category as women, right? If we were to break it down to a binary sport category, just men and women, they're women, right? So, um, a last question I have, do you guys think it's possible for cisgender women to achieve the same amount of physiological capability as trans women? Because we know that there's a lot of athletes, like women athletes, who are like not built the same, but definitely have like they're 6 feet soccer players who are women, female UFC athletes that are absolutely jacked. So I just want to know your guys' thoughts on that.
I think I've talked about it earlier, answering your previous question. I actually found her name's Duty Chand. So she
Mhm.
was the athlete that represented India, which had higher levels of testosterone. So if you want to consider her story, instead of like submitting to surgeries or drugs to compete in her events, she just challenged the rules and kept on competing against her other women. So if you sort of look at it at that way, then they could sort of challenge the rules. As like for her, she's a cisgender woman, but due to her high testosterone, she has the like physiological differences as I guess male trans woman counterparts could
Yeah,
possibly.
yeah, for sure. So you think it's more something that has to happen naturally rather than through training or anything like that.
Naturally, I don't know.
Fair
I
enough, fair enough. Yeah.
yeah. To bounce off like Nick's idea where he was talking about how like the lady had like higher testosterone levels. I feel like that cisgender women are kind of able to achieve that same amount compared to trans women.
Hmm.
But I feel like there's that limit to how much testosterone they can have. Like there's that
For sure.
range, and
Yeah.
then there's that like little bit past that range where there's that rare amount of people that kind of go beyond.
Yeah.
So I
Just
feel
that
like there's
small difference.
definitely,
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely that little group of people that are just like rare that have
Yeah.
more testosterone than others naturally.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, I think on that note, this concludes our podcast. We definitely got some good perspectives in, some good conversation. And again, this was Breaking Boundaries. Thanks for joining us on this wonderful morning. To everyone watching, stay safe and remember to promote women's sports.
All right.